Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Global Cities Education Network Public Forum, Excellence and Equity During the Pandemic. A step forward or a step back? It is fantastic to be here where I am, but in thought and mind in Surrey, British Columbia, where our hosts are helping us with a fantastic conference that we look forward to starting off with our program this evening. I'm Tony Jackson. I'm Vice President for Education and Director of the Center for Global Education at Asia Society. And I want to start this evening by thanking our hosts, our colleagues who lead the Surrey Schools in Surrey, British Columbia for this public program and for the week of activities that are planned that comprise the annual Global Cities Education Network Symposium, which I'll say a little bit more about in just a minute. Our colleagues in Surrey Schools could not have been more welcoming or more thoughtful in their help in planning this event. So to you, I offer our very profound thanks. Tonight's program reflects what's been on my mind, and I'm sure yours as well, about what's being revealed to us about education and about other fundamental aspects of our society by the kind of perfect storm of disruptions over the past 15 months, coming not only from the pandemic, but from ongoing crises caused or exacerbated by climate change. And in the US, certainly, what seems to be the unending cycle of violence and killing, especially as it's targeted to people of color and the uprisings against it. And now as we emerge from the pandemic, should we aspire to go back to the way things were, or should we work to rethink normal and strive to create something different and something better? It's been said many times now in education circles that a big part of what the pandemic revealed about education is the stark inequities that exist between students in their capacity to continue learning when learning cannot be done in schools and requires digital resources, as well as the inequities in the conditions at home that enable learning online to occur in a regular and reliable way. By that I mean, what we heard from teachers and school principals in Surrey and many other places when the pandemic hit, the most relevant question they had to ask students and their families wasn't, do you have a computer? Rather, do you have food enough to eat? And later, as the economic impact of COVID-19 sunk in, and the question wasn't, do you have Wi-Fi, but rather, does your house still have power? So do we return to schooling after the pandemic with an assumption, some might even call it magical thinking, that all students come to school equally prepared and equally motivated to learn? And do we go back to a perspective that says when students leave our education systems and we've sorted and certified them by grades and test scores, that the differences that will accrue among them really reflect how well they applied themselves? Or should we take a different tack and think about considering how well has the system adapted to them? So the question at hand tonight, excellence and equity during the pandemic, a step forward or a step backward, raises the immediate issue of how similar or different education will be in Surrey and education systems around the world. But it also raises a broader question. That is, if we think of the pandemic and the other challenges I've mentioned as in fact not disruptions to the norm, but a signal of what will be the norm going forward, are our education systems generally up to the task of producing students able to navigate this new normal, or better still, to be the change makers able to bend the arc of history towards real equality between people and a sustainable relationship with nature? Do we have future-ready learning systems? And if not, what would a future-ready system look like? And how do we get from where we are to where we need to go? Well, that's one of the larger themes of the Global Cities Education Network Symposium, of which this evening's public program is a kickoff event, and that will continue over the next several days. The Global Cities Education Network is an international learning community of city school systems in Asia and North America. It was launched in 2012 in Hong Kong, and this is, I believe, the 8th symposium. Member cities in the network include in the Asia Pacific region, Hangzhou, Melbourne, Shanghai, Singapore, and joining us for this symposium, Wellington, New Zealand. And in North America, we have colleagues from Broward County Schools in Florida, Denver, Highline Public Schools just near Seattle, Lexington, Kentucky, Toronto, and of course, here in Surrey, British Columbia. The intent of the Global Cities Education Network is to bring together teams of education leaders and other stakeholders from urban school systems to identify common high priority problems of policy and practice, and then to really pool their knowledge about what works and use that knowledge to systematically advance improvements in their school systems. And part of that work is to look at cities both within and outside the network that have shown marked improvements in outcomes for students, all students, but especially students marginalized by poverty or by prejudice and institutional racism. And that's what brings us to Surrey, which has had a remarkable, in many ways, certainly outcomes for students, but as well, a really resolute dedication to children's holistic development, their intellectual abilities to be sure, but also their socio-emotional capacities that are just as critical to bring out their full human potential. So I'll close my remarks where I began, and that's to thank some folks. As you know, it generally takes money and talent to produce anything of quality. So I want to just give quick thanks to the Oak Foundation and to the Hewlett Foundation for their financial support. And in terms of talent, as in, if she weren't so talented, this whole thing wouldn't happen, I want to thank my colleague at Asian Society, Heather Singmaster. And so with that, I'm really pleased to turn the proceedings over to my new enormously talented colleague, Jordan Tinney, Superintendent from Surrey Schools. Jordan?
Thank you very much, Tony. It's a great pleasure for us to be with you here this evening, and I want to acknowledge your most gracious remarks about the partnership we formed, and know that the feeling is very mutual about what Asia Society and Global Cities Network has done for us in terms of being able to put on this event over the next few days. So I want to welcome you all to this evening's session, and really an opportunity, how we see it, to share our learning journey. Tonight for us is the public portion of a week-long symposium where we're just extremely excited to be hosting the world. When I think about our colleagues in China and Singapore and Australia and New Zealand, and our friends in several of our neighboring United States just to the south of us here, it's truly a pleasure to say this evening, welcome to Surrey. Our collective explorations, when I think about what do we all strive to do on a daily basis, really are in the interest of the education and well-being of all children. And when we think of the challenges that we faced in this extraordinary time, now beginning our second year of education during a pandemic, we often think about, well, how do we manage to sustain quality education in an era of such unprecedented disruption? And as Tony was mentioning, not disruption of just our learning agendas, but our social connections, our emotional support structures, the very fabrics that bring and draw us together are all disrupted, shattered, and finding their own new way. And in Surrey, while we work to educate our 75,000 students, we certainly don't believe we have any magic crystal ball or a silver bullet, but what we really do is welcome the opportunity to share our story and to learn from you. We're very excited to participate with you this evening and in the coming days, and we look forward to learning with you, alongside you in our time together. So Icewale, welcome on behalf of the Surrey School District. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce our friend and colleague who will guide us through the evening, Mr. Anthony McKay. And Anthony McKay, as many of you may know, is President and CEO of the Washington, D.C.-based National Center on Education and the Economy. And if I were to read his full biography here, we wouldn't have enough time for the conference. Just a master facilitator and a very wise guide in all things education and leadership. Please welcome our friend and colleague, Tony McKay. Tony, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It's great to be with you, and I'm going to ask Marvin if he might just bring up the screen in a way where we can see each other, or at least on my screen. I don't have a full view, but that could just be me, Marvin. It is me, so thank you. You can see the level of my expertise. It actually at least getting my screen right. So, Jordan, thank you. Tony, thank you. This is a fantastic opportunity, as you said, Tony, for the the kind of international, global interaction, cooperation that we have now been engaged in, as you say, Tony, since 2012, when the Global Cities Education Network was first formed. But here we are this evening with the Centre for Global Education at the Asia Society and Surrey Schools in British Columbia, our GCEN colleagues and a wider public coming together for our opening event for this year's convening. So a huge welcome to everybody who's joining us, not only obviously in BC, but primarily in British Columbia, but certainly also more widely, both across North America and Asia. Can I just indicate that we're going to now conduct the public program in three parts. The first is to report, an early report, on a very significant piece of research work that's being undertaken here in British Columbia, Surrey Schools, and we'll move to that in a moment. Then what has become a feature of our GCEN convening each year, a public program that invites colleagues from multiple jurisdictions to reflect upon the environment that we're currently operating in. And Tony, as you said, here we are with a focus on equity and excellence in a hopefully emerging post-pandemic world in which our learning systems are being effectively redesigned, or at least I think your encouragement, Tony, was that we believe they do need to be redesigned if we're going to achieve excellence and equity in our learning systems that's adequate to a future for all young people. And then the third part will be opening up the conversation to all through the chat function, and we'll do the very best we can to represent the issues that you are responding to, comments that you're making, questions that might arise. So there's the program. But part one, this is where the spontaneity emerges, Christina. Before I introduce you, I want to say to Jordan and to Tony, this is not an accident that some research work was commissioned that would inform us, not only for this convening, but it's early days with the research work, but will certainly inform us as we all progress our work over the coming months. So, Tony, Jordan, just say a word about why we commissioned the research. Maybe, Tony, you might start.
Well, just I would say, as we got to know the system in Surrey and got to know how thoughtfully that they had done all their work for years, but then particularly sort of applied that thoughtfulness to the situation with regard to how to move forward with schooling during the pandemic, it struck me as an opportunity we did not want to lose in terms of learning and documenting the procedures that have actually been instantiated, but also some of the thinking. I'm of a mind that we can develop what we're thinking of as sort of a use case from this work that basically says, here is the dynamics that went into play in this particular school district. And it isn't as though any other school district should just copy that, but it's going to provide deep learnings that could be applicable elsewhere, which is sort of the reason why we have the Global Cities Education Network to begin with. So it's really, a matter of striking while the iron is hot, if you will, to capture some incredible work that's going on and making sure that we're catching in real time so that we actually can be able to both know, but also to a certain extent inform it as it goes through its natural order, if you will. So that was the rationale behind it. Yeah.
Brilliant, Tony. And Jordan, actually, you've had a bit of attention. Surrey Schools, my own organisation, NCE, also did a bit of a profile, and others, of course, have been fascinated by the work that you've been undertaking. But you'd be the first, I think, to share the glory with other districts across the province. But just before I ensure that Christina tells us the story so far. Just say a word about how you see this, your aspiration for the study.
Well, I think, like you say, we just try to do the very best we can. And I think that the ability to have an external lens, we're constantly asking ourselves, like, how do we know? How do we know we're doing the right thing? And how do we know we're serving all children? And so, as you say, districts around BC believe we're doing great thing. I have no doubt that probably everyone who's here has enormous pockets and highlights of amazing things. But I think to pull in an external lens and look and to join with us in terms of being our critical friend and, trying to answer, are we realizing our dreams? I just think it's invaluable. So that's why to take you up on the offer.
Brilliant. Well, Christina Russell, welcome. You are the Senior Managing Director of Policy Studies Associates, DC based. Just before we get into the study, just say a word about yourself and your organisation.
Sure. Well, I'm thrilled to be here tonight with everyone. As Tony said, I'm with Policy Studies Associates. We're a research evaluation capacity building firm based in DC. We work nationwide, and for many years have had the pleasure of working with Asia Society and GCEN. We focus on education and youth development issues, and are interested in looking at system level strategies, at equity, at thinking about how to really improve education for all young people and provide the supports they need. And so I'm here representing the case study for Surrey, and so glad to be sharing some of our initial early findings with the group tonight.
Well, Christina, just recognising that it is early days, but we are feeling a little privileged that we get access to the beginning of the work. If you had to try and capture the purpose of the case study and just some of your early impressions, how would you sum that up?
Right. So our purpose of the study, I think, is really exciting, and it's to think about how to really take some of the commitments that Surrey has been implementing and seeing in practice in their district, and think about how to operationalize that, how to unpack it to really understand how other districts can learn from the strategies and work that's been implemented, but think not just at the system level and what Jordan and his cabinet have been working on, but how that really plays out at the school level and ultimately at the classroom level. Where we are in our early findings tonight is really in that setting the stage and understanding the work that's gone into creating a foundation for equity. But we'll be excited to dive a little bit deeper in the months that come and in our eventual report.
Yep. And Jordan, I take it you've been an early witness. Christina, what was he like to interview?
Well, I think it was sort of fun to listen back to his introduction just now, because it was really reminiscent of some of our early conversations with Jordan and with his team as well, to really hear them talk about their work and how their commitment to equity is really so intuitive and natural at this point, and that's really the foundation of their work. And we were having, I think, early conversations to hear about the models to be implemented with blended learning through this pandemic and some other initiatives, and trying to push to think about equity. And what they came down to is saying, well, it's the Surrey way to do equity. Not really talk about equity, but just the way that we do it. And so I think what we've been trying to do in our subsequent interviews is to sort of unpack what that means to do the Surrey way, and what does it really look like in kind of those practical, concrete ways that can inform others.
So, Jordan, I think it's interesting that Christina says there's a kind of intuitive approach, but as you said earlier, what you want is the benefit of evidence in order to be able to assess impact. However, you haven't been without intentionality. I mean, in terms of the purpose of the case study for you, definitely to build an evidence base.
Yeah, I think so. I think, once particularly we're around the blended models and the response to the pandemic, we again are just so curious. How do we know what the true impact has been on the children? I have no question some children have thrived, perhaps unexpectedly, with the structures that we've set up. But I believe there are other children which have been harmed, the entire pandemic and the impact on mental health, and particularly those who are most disadvantaged. So back to the importance of finding out in the evidence. I think sometimes when you can become insular as a district as well. I often say, does a fish know it swims in water? So you all think you're doing great stuff, but to have someone come in from the outside and say, well, wait a minute, how are you intentional about supporting the profession and the autonomy of teachers? How are you intentional about looking for the learners who may be lost? It's just such a rich place to go. And while the iron is hot because we're in the middle of it.
So, Kristen, this is always the thing with researchers because, when you say to them, but what's starting to emerge? Give us your early findings. What are you struck by? Can you be unusually assertive? We won't hold you to this, but it'd be great if you're able to say, hey, listen, there's 3 or 4 things that do seem to be standing out. Yeah? What would they be?
Sure. Well, I think the first one, I think Jordan also just demonstrated in thinking about that equity is really a mindset in Surrey. It's not a buzzword. And in fact, the district team keeps reminding us that that's not a word that's commonly used to say we're doing equity, we're taking equity strategies. But it's really a way of thinking about the way that students will be affected by the policies, by programs, by practices that are being implemented. And that's really at the core of the decision making in Surrey. And that's coming out consistently in our conversations with the district team. And I think what was demonstrating that question about how does this decision affect our most vulnerable students in Surrey, looking at it through that lens, but also constantly questioning, what do we really mean by that? What do we mean by vulnerability? Who are the students who might be falling behind that the district may not be reaching yet? And sort of constantly questioning that through the mindset of equity, of reaching the vulnerable students, but questioning those assumptions and rethinking decisions and policies and practices to improve that and reach all the students moving forward. That's really a sort of a highlight, a top level highlight that we're seeing as an emerging theme.
And you're starting to see some other features of BC that would be distinctive, potentially distinctive, given the nature of your work. You see this across districts in the US and more broadly internationally, but are there a couple of other emerging themes that you think are really going to be worth exploring?
Sure, and I think one that I'll highlight is this structure, I think, is really distinctive of the district. And we're struck that the cabinet, the associate superintendents are really structured around communities. The district is committed to student-centered learning, but that's also reflected at the district level. So the leadership isn't siloed into content areas, as is often the case with teaching and learning, data and assessment, but rather each assistant superintendent is overseeing a set of schools within a region. And that really enables the leadership to get to know the school buildings really deeply and to understand both the assets and the challenges facing their communities. So we heard some the superintendents tell us about how some of their regions are in rapidly gentrifying areas, for instance. Others are in areas with high population of newcomer immigrant students. And really that allows them to think about the unique needs of communities and students that are surfacing in each of those areas, understanding the context, figuring out what resources are available to support those unique needs. So I think that commitment to communities really ensures that students aren't getting lost in the decision-making or in resources.
Hey, Jordan, I'm not a stranger to your place. We've worked together, and BC is a place that I almost, I think, can claim that I'm a member of the family now. But the two things that really strike me, and I guess the question is whether this is what you are also hoping to explore. One is the power of data, and you have been really disciplined about this. And the other is, I think, how can I put it, investing in shared leadership, or at least in creating the enabling conditions where the profession can exercise leadership. Say a word about how you hope, given that you've invested in those two things, how you hope that will come forward as being part of the explanation in the way in which you are having greater impact.
Yeah, so I think two things come to mind. To use the example around the evidence piece, student mental health, using something like the level of anxiety. So we did a survey from out of UBC on the HELP program, as you know, the initiative, and what emerged from that were a map around the district of the students' level of anxiety. And we were really surprised to find out that some of our highest levels of anxiety were in our areas of high socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
And that the students are gravely worried about post-secondary education, the ability to compete, and will they be on an even plane? We expected the vulnerability and the anxiety in areas where they weren't even able to go to school or maybe had food. But when this came to light, there's just one example of shifting your decisions in the way you look at the district, and then it makes perfect sense. I think the other one was, and the value of an external partnership is this whole thread about the way in which we try to enable the teacher as autonomous professional. We're going to talk about this in the week to come, that connected ability, the connected autonomy piece around empowering, I'll say, educators and staff at all levels to do the very best they can while continually having structures that keep them connected to each other, because they can't do it alone. And so I think from a leadership standpoint, how do you give people, as you said, how do you build the conditions for the very best leadership to emerge, which has the great benefit of building your own capacity across the system, but also all kids benefit as the whole system rises.
Christina, just in our closing minute, before I just ask Tony to say a word about how we hope we will socialise this work and spread it widely. But as you pointed out, you're at a particular stage in the study, in the case study. Just give us a little bit of a kind of preview of where you go next, where you're going to focus your attention.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're really excited to dive in to a couple of schools and understand really what this looks like at the school level. So when we think about equity being part of the mindset, part of the culture, how does that happen? What are the supports and structures that schools are receiving where inclusivity really is part of their decision making? We're seeing a lot of these bright sides and we're highlighting these successes tonight, but we also know, as Jordan started off, that there are areas where there is going to be struggle. And I think that's really an area to learn. Where are those pain points in the district, especially in response to this, the COVID response, the pandemic learning? Who is left behind or not reached? What can we learn about the steps that a district is taking to continue to support all of its students moving forward, and especially to support its schools and its teachers in working with students to make sure that everybody has a chance to succeed and thrive. So we're really excited to dive into schools, talking with leadership, talking with the school community to really understand what this looks like on the ground in Surrey.
Brilliant. Christina, thank you. Thank you, Jordan. Tony, this is an exciting piece of work. Just give us a sense of what we hope we'll be able to socialise across the network and internationally.
Yeah, I will. But before we do, I just wanted to, I was really struck by this. I can't help but get into the content as well for a second. And one of the things that I would just like Jordan to note is sort of the demographics of the population of students within the district, because I think there's always this question. Well, it's a district that's all kids of high socioeconomic level. They're all easy to they educate themselves, but I doubt that's the case. So Jordan, could you just say a word about what the demographics of your district are?
Yeah, so we're at 75,000 students. We are a rapidly growing, about 1,000 students a year, multicultural district. We have over 180 languages. Many of our schools, English would be absolutely the minority language. About 65% of the population speak another language as a first language at home. Very diverse as a district. We absolutely have pockets of the district that are more wealthy than others, but we are the urban sprawl of Vancouver. So these are the families that have come out of Vancouver, and these are the immigrants who have come into British Columbia from around the world in every possible corner. That's Surrey, and that's who we are.
Yeah, I wanted to make note of that because I do think that what I really wanted to sort of touch upon just for a quick second is that what I think is going to be a driving force that Christina has mentioned is this sort of normative mindset of equality when you're dealing with a very diverse population of students. I mean, it strikes me as just in hearing this conversation that what you've achieved, and this is part of what I'd love to unpack, like how did you get there, is the sense that, you know, we are going to start with the assumption that equality of outcomes or quality of experience, quality of development is the starting point. It isn't, you know, and so anything that deviates from that sort of offends us, and we're going to work to make sure that doesn't happen. And that mentality, I think, is going to be really critical as we think about sort of documenting this use case for broader purposes. And to Tony's question, I think what we have in mind is two things immediately. One is this, as I said, is a bit of a use case study that we want to use in another aspect of our work, where we're working with a group of school districts that are very intentionally focusing on dismantling systemic racism within their districts. And so what we've wanted to do is to think about how do we find some other examples across the world, frankly, where we can get at you know, what they are doing that actually is achieving that very, very, very difficult proposition. You know, there are obviously huge issues of attitudes about students from different backgrounds that make a difference, but what really sort of holds those attitudes and brings them to the core are the deeper structural systemic elements of schooling that sort of hold inequities and need then to be dismantled, which is obviously the title of what I just said. So we want to have this use case be very prominent in that work, which is, again, affecting 10 school districts in the United States. But then, of course, the broader ideal is that within our GCEN network and other districts around the world, we can publish these findings and really both instruct and inform the dialogue about what it really takes to create equitable, future-ready systems. You know, our whole notion is that you know, these aren't magical things that just happen. There are processes and ways of adapting thinking that need to be explicated. And so we want this to be one of, we hope, you know, more than one exemplary case studies where we're bringing those kinds of practical yet deep ways of being and operating that actually can get us, as I said in my opening remarks, from where we are now to where we need to go. So it's that notion of there's some immediate targets within the broader field, if you will, we want to inform so that this becomes that which people elsewhere in the world can really take hold of and make their own.
Yep. Brilliant. Thank you, Tony. And thank you particularly for calling out the nature and diversity of the district. Jordan, I think that really has generated a number of questions. I need to just check. Christina, are you able to stay with us throughout the public program? Great. Well, then what I'll do is, rather than go to a couple of issues now, I'll bring you back in as we get to the final open mic session where we'll have, through our encouragement right now, many other contributions. There are a couple in particular that I'll circle back to, but thank you both very much indeed. And thank you, Tony, for this opening session that sets us up for the international panel. Now, colleagues, you will see from the public program that, of course, the wider purpose of this public program launching effectively the GCEN convening is for us to explore how we are reimagining and redesigning our learning system, our learning systems across geographies, obviously to be future ready, but the lens that we are bringing to this is particularly the lens of equity. And it's pretty true that just as we move into the international panel, and I'm going to introduce Susan Payon in just one moment, that we have all been experiencing what it is to have revealed the extent of inequities in our respective systems. And so we are responding to that now. And so in the session that we're about to enter into, we want to explore how different jurisdictions are consciously and intentionally tackling the equity question, but they're tackling the equity questions, I think, in ways that go to the very heart of how we design our learning system, because we're clear that we want all young people to graduate to use BC's language, educated citizens that will promote not only social harmony and economic prosperity, but our own sustainability as we share this planet. So it's high stakes, and this last couple of years have really brought this into sharp relief. I was hoping we were also going to be joined by Mishwan from Shanghai, but Heather, unless you tell me otherwise, I don't see Mishwan on the screen, and therefore I am going to call upon my two panel members, in particular, to just say a word about themselves, and then we'll launch into some short presentations. All of the bio notes for our international colleagues reside on the chat. They've been entered. Thank you very much indeed. So let me firstly, Susan, come to you. I always like to do this because it's far better when somebody introduces themselves. Just say a brief word about yourself, your role, your responsibilities, and generally, before we enter into your opening comments, just a bit of a reaction to how you're feeling about the current state of play.
Sure. So thank you. It is such a joy and honor for me to be with all of you today. I am at heart still a high school English, ELL, and journalism teacher. That's how I began my career in education. That was followed by an early career starting at about age 7 when I taught my stuffed animals in my bedroom. If you actually ask if you're ever in a room of teachers and you ask how many of you taught your dolls, stuffed animals, something, a lot of hands go up. So I'm a teacher at heart, but I got lost along the way and made my way to the superintendency. And so I am currently in my 9th year serving as the superintendent in Highline Public Schools, which is a richly diverse school system serving students in pre-K through 12. We are just south of Seattle. If you land at SeaTac International Airport, my district surrounds the airport. 17,500 students, roughly, over 100 different languages, the top ones being Spanish, Vietnamese, and Somali. So when I say richly diverse, we are truly richly diverse. And I will get into this later more, but I will share that in Highline, rather than a mission or vision, we have a promise, because I believe a promise implies action. And our promise is to know every student by name, strength, and need, so they graduate prepared for the future they choose. And I would offer that if we could say across the United States, across the globe, quite frankly, that we were delivering on that promise, we wouldn't be having conversations and debates around equity issues, because I believe that is a very clear stake in the ground around equity. And so that's me.
Thank you very much. Payon, welcome from Singapore. So it's not quite evening where you are, but it's great to have you with us. And of course, Singapore's been a wonderful partner in GCEN from the beginning. So just a word about your own role, and maybe also just a bit of a capture of how you're feeling about the current state of play as well.
Thanks, Anthony. Very honored to be here in distinguished company today to learn from this sharing as well. Good evening to everyone, and also maybe good morning from where I am. So today, I think the experience shared from the Surrey study has really resonated on a few levels. But first, maybe a little bit about myself. I look after planning in the Ministry of Education in Singapore. What that means is that we look at the structures, policies and programs that govern the general education space in Singapore. That's maybe about 500,000 students. And definitely equity and social mobility is really key to our agenda, especially in Singapore where, manpower and the workforce, human resource is the key resource that we have. We have no other natural resources. So this is very much ingrained in our mindset to really support every single student to fulfill their potential in life. And I think the COVID experience, as I'll share later, has really just reinforced that. Just a little bit about myself also. I was not always in the Ministry of Education. I used to be in the Ministry of Manpower in the Singapore government. And I think that has given me a perspective on the urgency of preparing our students well for the future. I mean, when we look at the challenges in the workforce, when we look at how fast the economies and companies are transforming and the kind of skills and dispositions that are needed, I think this has really brought home the urgency for me as I look at education issues today. So really, I think we have a big challenge ahead of us, and we are trying our best to prepare every student for that.
Ben, thank you. Well, Susan, let me just ask each of you just to make some opening remarks. So, Susan, just to be blunt about the situation that we're confronting, if you had to be able to share with us exactly how you're going about tackling the equity challenge and read that as being the wider learning challenge, how would you capture that at the moment?
Some days better than others. I think that this equity work, and I will take it to a more granular, specific level, the racial equity work that we, especially in this country right now, are having to reckon with, is a perpetual learning journey. Yep. And so I think that viewing this work as ongoing, as not a box to be checked, as not something to be finished, but work that we are constantly engaged in and learning and getting better at, is how I would frame it. And in Highline, we have a, and again, I'm happy to share with people after, we have an extensive equity policy and set of procedures that we have been working with for many, many years. But the pandemic has laid bare the depth and breadth of the inequities. And I want to be clear, it's not just the inequities within our school systems, it's within our larger society. And I think that what the real interesting point here is people are now realizing just how much we expect our public schools to do in ameliorating those inequities and the limitations that we have in that. And I'll speak to that a little bit more later when I talk about the work that we're doing. But some days better than others, and we are on a journey. That's what I would say.
And just say a little more about the racial equity question, because look, all of us that are involved in this public program this evening are acutely aware of the issues around systemic racism and systemic inequity, but particularly, as you point out, around systemic racism. But it does not just simply speak to the moment of Black Lives Matter. It speaks to all of us who have First Nation people, Indigenous communities, and others who, in ways that we would now, I think, have to confront as being intolerable.
Agreed.
We must respond. So how are you managing to capture that challenge in a kind of public discourse way? How are you able to communicate the seriousness and significance of this, and we will not go forward tolerating this kind of inequity?
It's incredibly challenging. And it is work that I am working very hard to get better at. I'll be very honest with you. Because this work there's so much pain and trauma and history attached to this that people bring to the conversations and to the work, finding a way to honor that, while still moving the work forward is a challenge. I will be honest with that. I will say that in Highline, one concrete step that we've taken recently. So we have, as I said, we have an equity policy. We also have an equity lens. It's a set of 6 questions that we want to ask ourselves before we make significant decisions. And it's, I'll just give you an example. Who are the groups affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision? What are the potential impacts on these groups? Have we consulted with the people that may be impacted by this decision? How might they inform this decision in a different way? And I will say that my cabinet and I think others around the district, think through those questions, but I don't think we're doing it enough by intention. I think it's happening by chance. So we have actually just hired a program manager for racial equity initiatives, who is actually going to help us operationalize that equity lens in the decisions that we're making at the district level and at the school level. Because as I said, it happens sometimes. It doesn't happen all the time. We need to make that how we do business. It needs to be the Highline way. Frankly, it needs to be the everyone's way. But that's one concrete step that we're taking right now to address it.
And Susan, you and other colleagues from both US districts and also Canada have been part of a working group convened last year in Toronto.
Yes.
Digital Promise has been a great supporter of this work. I reflect on the Toronto convening, where the power of this agenda really came through with different experiences across different settings, but nonetheless, I would have thought a significant amount of progress. Are you feeling that as we enter into a kind of 2021, 2022 year, right, post-pandemic, what's your sense of optimism that we can really make a difference?
Yeah, good question. So as you referenced the gathering in Toronto, and I believe it's really important to credit those from whom we learn and grow. And my dear friend and colleague, Baron Davis, who is the superintendent of Richland 2 public schools here in the United States, it was actually the work that he and his team are doing that inspired us to hire this program manager for racial equity initiatives. And that came out of that convening. I think it's really important as leaders right now that we be honest about the challenges that we're facing. There are days where it is hard to find optimism. I will be very honest with you. There are some challenging times. As an example, today was the first day since March of 2020 that my middle and high school students set foot in their school buildings.
Right.
And that's real and that's hard. And so, but here is what I will say that does give me hope. And here's the deal. If you work in public education, you get up every day believing the impossible is possible. And you work to make that true. And so I believe that while the muscle memory of a bureaucracy is strong, and I would argue that the public education system in the United States is as entrenched a bureaucracy as you're going to find. And so the pull for us to go back where we came from is going to be very, very strong.
Yeah.
I think that we've learned enough that we can counter that. And I have some very specific things that I think we need to consider, and I'll share that as we move forward. Tony.
That's fantastic. By the way, I think you've just raised a crucial point, and that is that across this public program, we've got jurisdictions where schools, as you just point out, are just opening up. Other schools that effectively remained open, right? And the approach that British Columbia took to this, the approach that Singapore took to this. I mean, some of that a function of the extent of the COVID-19 virus, but also to some extent a reflection of particular policy settings. So, we've all had quite different experiences.
I will say that I believe children in the Puget Sound region of Washington are cursed by politics and geography. Yep. Because there are children in this nation who have had a full year of school.
Yep.
And my children have not. Despite the hard work of my educators and families and everybody doing distance learning, it's not the same. And it has become such a politicized issue. And I fear, I don't fear, I know that down the line, we will look back on this, particularly in my part of the world, and say, we didn't get it right.
Yeah.
We didn't do right.
Susan, I think you're right, because this is the politics of education have always been with us, mm-hmm. but acutely with us now. Mm-hmm. And as you point out, it's a matter of reasserting what's in the public interest, what is in the common good. Yeah. Yes. And yes. I think, Bayonne, in a sense, Singapore has been clear about the way in which it wanted to handle the pandemic from the start. And it'll be interesting for you just to reflect on this. We should not be suggesting in any sense that you've not had challenges. I mean, a lot of people look at Singapore and they say, yeah, well, on the PISA metrics, high on excellence, high on equity, yes, but actually a very complex society. Going back to Tony's point before with Jordan about the diversity within Surrey, within BC, Singapore, yeah, city-state, but not without diversity. So give us an overview of how you have responded to the pandemic in equity terms and more broadly.
Yes, indeed, Anthony. I think you have hit the nail on the head. We are a city-state, but we do have a very rich diversity of our students, both in multiracial, multicultural, as well as huge variance in terms of socioeconomic status of their families as well. So I think in terms of responding to the pandemic, of course, as you say, we have had our fair share of challenges. One thing that I think we were very determined to do was to keep schools open as long as possible. So I think back in February and March of last year, I think our minister made a great effort to get public buy-in, as well as buy-in, even within the government to keep schools open, and for our schools to have very, very clear instructions and guidance and support to implement safe management measures across the school. So we have been fortunate in a way that we have avoided having cases of transmission through schools for a very long time. And we managed to keep schools open for most of the year. But of course, we had to close our schools for at least a month in April. This was when the whole nation underwent what we call the circuit breaker mode, which was essentially a form of lockdown. So schools were closed and we did full home-based learning, online learning. And for the month after that, we brought forward the summer school holidays. So children remained at home. And we were very fortunate that we could resume progressively since last June. And credit to all the teachers and educators on the ground for valiantly ramping up in terms of online learning and digital learning. And we had also had to put quite a lot of effort to make sure that there was digital inclusion, especially for children who did not have access to the devices or to Wi-Fi, internet, broadband connection, and so on. So there were quite a lot of efforts there. So I was thinking that I would share maybe 3 insights from our experience that we have learned from COVID. I think the first is that we have always been very aware of focusing our resources towards supporting disadvantaged students, be it through financial assistance, education support, and also to, in a way, to have better social mixing to expand their social networks and social capital. But I think one thing that has really been accentuated much more is that digital equity. And I think COVID has laid bare the digital divide in many countries, including Singapore. So this is where we had to provide additional support in a very fast manner to the disadvantaged students. This is also an area where we have been trying to ramp up, not just for the pandemic, but in view of the future economy and how we need every student to be fully digital literate and have that facility to operate in fully digital environments. So we had some foundations that were laid earlier, including key development of what we call the student learning space that was rolled out in 2018, actually. So quite fortuitous timing, and which is an online platform that has learning across all curriculum subjects for the students. And this is where we could tap on this platform during COVID for the teachers to reach out to the students during full home-based learning. And with this experience for that full home-based learning, we managed to bring forward our digital literacy plan by about 7 years, actually, for all our secondary school students to have a personal device by the end of this year. So this is going to be a structural shift in our education approach, not just for the pandemic, but also moving forward. I thought just to stop here in case you wanted to bring forward any other questions.
And it's interesting to me that, in a sense, Singapore has invested seriously already, and as you point out, used the pandemic to up that investment in what we might call access to both digital resources, to accessing a platform that was already well established, to stronger interaction between the teaching profession, young people and their parents. So it's not as if this had not been a feature of your system pre-pandemic. But it just strikes me that, to quote some others who have been talking about this, you will not get equity unless you are seriously prepared to invest in equality, right? This is what the game's about. Would you say that the public conversation, the dialogue that's been going on in Singapore has been clear about the need to increase that level of investment? What's been the story that's accompanied the way in which you responded to the COVID challenge?
Well, I think it's, especially in the area of digital inclusion, I think what has happened, what the pandemic has presented as an opportunity for us is really in terms of mindsets. So you mentioned the public conversation, and I think pre-COVID, it was a lot about, how we are going to progressively induct not just the children, but their families and parents into the right mindset of using these tools, and even operating remotely so that they can be more self-directed at certain segments of their learning. But I think what the pandemic has really accelerated is forced upon us this reality that we have to be able to operate remotely. And I think that has really accelerated mindset change for the teachers, for the parents. Many parents had to, on the fly, learn how to supervise their children, how to operate these devices. And I think that's why we were able to make the sort of a bold move in effect to bring forward the timeline of equipping all our secondary school students with these devices by 7 years. Initially, it was going to be progressive through all across the system. It would take 7 years, and now we are aiming to do all of it by the end of 2021. So I think that there has been a real, in a way, advantage in terms of taking hold of the crisis and the opportunities.
I think I'm going to go to Susan on this very point, but let me ask Jordan and Christina and Tony if you'd come back on camera, because I just want to now open this up to some of the questions that are being posed. But Susan, the mindset shift was exactly where Tony Jackson started the conversation for this program, namely that we are not going to go back, right? We're going to go forward. Now, it's interesting, Susan, how would you define the going forward? Let me just give you one example. Payon, you've moved now to ensure that, if not every week, certainly every couple of weeks, there will be, if you like, online at-home learning. That's going to be very much part of the mix. The hybrid model, if you like, right? It's going to be a feature of how we think about learning environments. And sure, school will still be absolutely vital, as will, how can I put it, the learning environment, as well as classrooms, absolutely vital to young people's learning in so many respects. But also the online environment, the digital environment, the at-home environment can be very, very powerful. So, Susan, just a quick response. Are you imagining you might be able to accelerate, fast forward 7 years on something that you might have thought would only take, that might take, can you fast forward within a year or so? And I guess I'm going to ask you, Jordan, the same question, whether or not we are really looking at the opportunity for fast forwarding here. Susan?
Yeah, good question. And I never want to disagree with my brilliant friend, Tony Jackson, but I am not convinced that we aren't going to go back to where we were. As I said before, the muscle memory of a bureaucracy is strong, and it will take active work to not go back. I do believe that we have an opportunity, and in Highline, we are working on, as many are, an acceleration versus a remediation strategy, right? So that we're going to meet kids where they are and move them forward. And I will close with this, because I know you wanted me to be brief, but I was asked to write an op-ed back in December around what I was thinking about how we're going to come out of this. And I titled it "Delivering on Equity Post-Pandemic, Will We or Won't We?" And I listed 6 things that I believe every child in this country, in this world, is deserving of, and that we as educators need to deliver on. And Tony touched on some of these in his introduction. The first one is healthy food, so they're ready to learn each and every day. The second is reliable home broadband access permanently, so that learning is not contingent on being in a school building, to your point, that we know our children are going to be learning outside of the traditional schoolhouse. Third, an adult advocate in their school who knows them by name, strength, and need and checks in with them weekly, if not daily. Fourth, an individualized learning plan that supports them on a path to graduation and the future they choose for themselves, not one that an adult predetermines for them by either providing certain opportunities or limiting certain opportunities. 5, a team consisting of their family and school staff communicating regularly and working together to ensure that our students have the academic and social emotional support they need. And finally, more opportunities to learn year-round, meaning a shift away from the antiquated agrarian school calendar that leads to the summer slide that does not do our children any service. And so, well, I'll end with this, Tony. I'm sorry if I'm going a bit long, but nothing that I just listed is huge and shiny and innovative, but it's real, and we're not doing it. And so I would offer, if it is so common sense, why can't we figure out as the adults how to do this for our children? And I think that's our collective call right now.
Yeah, got it. Jordan, do you want to hop in here? I'm on the sort of theme of. By the way, I'm welcoming chat contributions. I'm going to come to 3 or 4 of them in a moment. But Jordan, what about the kind of accelerant effect here? Are you seeing the opportunity for fast forwarding in ways that Susan just referred to?
Yeah, I think I'll pick on Susan's 6 things and say, because some unique things are happening. I mean, ultimately, I feel like we are in the hands of the educators. They are the ones who can make the shift. And, I just received a proposal yesterday from a group where one of our Indigenous communities don't have Wi-Fi, don't have access to technology, and don't want to come anywhere near a school during the pandemic. So what did we do? We put Wi-Fi there, and we took a teacher and an education assistant to them. Excuse me. And that's how we've been running for the year. And remember, we've been in session since September, right? So like full time. And so what the proposal said was, Jordan, this is working. So I don't have your list in my head, Susan, but I think, what do they have? They have a team. They have 2 people who are dedicated to them. They have access. They have technology. They're learning in their community.
Yep.
They are connecting with their families. They are connecting with their culture. And what they're saying to me is, Jordan, for this investment, let us do this 1 more year. And what went through my head is, of course, the absolutely the bureaucratic, dollars and cents, and holy cow, that's a big ask. But the other piece was, what's the cost of not doing it? These children are fairly significantly behind. And so do I invest in them now? Because back to your data part, Tony, they have evidence. The teachers are saying, look at the gains we're making under this model. And, if not now, then when do we do this? And so I think there's that piece. On the other part is the teachers, the practice I'm seeing from some teachers, I don't see all teachers, I just see them incorporating new technologies and new mechanisms and new structures into their daily practice where I don't see them going back. If we had done this for 1 month or 2 months, I do see them snapping back. But for us, we're into 12, 15 months of this. And now teachers are developing this repository of materials and resources that they built on which to draw. And I don't see them all just giving that up. So I'll pause there.
Well, let me just ask Payo this, because there are a couple of chat contributions here. Thank you, Ross Scott. Thank you, Susan Enfield. I think the issue that's emerging for us is, yeah, sure, and Jordan, you've highlighted, it is about a profession shifting its practice, but also we're being told it's about a partnership between young people, educators and parents. So, Payon, there's an encouragement here for us to say, yeah, this is not just about getting parental engagement or interest, it's about a genuine partnership. What's your view about Singapore's position on this? Are you seeing parents coming into the learning equation much more powerfully?
Yes, definitely. I think the parents have to be on board, and I think here we have had, some successes and some challenges as well. I think, again, the kids who need most in terms of the support also tend to be in families which are less ready or maybe less amenable to supporting their children. Sometimes it's a matter of ability, sometimes it's a matter of mindset. And I think this is why which was one of the points I wanted to make, was also we've been embarking on making this a whole of society, whole of community effort. So even before the pandemic, but especially through the pandemic, we have been trying our best to partner agents, social service agencies, ethnic self-help groups in the community to reach out to some of these parents and families of the children which are disadvantaged and more vulnerable. And this goes beyond just the physical access to laptops, to internet and so on, and school meals, to really looking at what are the underlying issues that some of these students and parents face. So one of the initiatives that we have been trying for 1 year is to pilot a town level coordinator, who is cited within the community service organization, to link up with the school, look at the children who have some at-risk indicators, for example, emerging attendance issues and so on, and link them up with various volunteers and community service organizations to reach out and befriend the family, help bring them on board in terms of whatever type of resources that the family needs, be it academic, financial, or even counseling and so on. And through that, benefit the child in the longer term. So I think that's an approach we have been trying to in 3 or 4 towns. So far, it's worked quite encouragingly. We have seen some encouraging improvement in attendance and so on. So I think this approach of reaching out to the parents and families, linking up with community support with the school, having a much more integrated and coordinated system that's managed and tracked right at the ministry level. I think that's something that we have been trying to do in the last 1 to 2 years, and I think we are definitely determined to press on with more of this.
Thank you. Tony, I'm going to come to you in a moment as we wrap up the session, but just to give you an advance notice that the theme of social and emotional learning, which is going to be very much part of our discourse over the next couple of days, is emerging. And I want to ask you a particular question about that. But before I do, Christina, I have questions here from Truman and Tim that you will have seen that go to your study and link pretty strongly with what Susan has been arguing about the nature of our challenge, particularly how can we undertake our work now in culturally responsive ways and particularly mindful of particular populations. Just as you are doing the study, as distinct from the broader system response here that we're talking about, how are you taking account of culturally responsive approaches, and would you be looking at particular subgroups in ways that you think might reveal something more to us about socioeconomic factors?
Thanks for the question. I think it's something that's certainly on our mind as we do this study or any study in school districts and systems. I think with this case study in Surrey Schools, our goal is to really go deep into a small number of schools. We're doing a qualitative study. We expect to work with about 3 schools that we're working with the district to identify the kind of a range of schools that addresses the diversity and different perspectives that we'll be able to really learn from to share with other districts and systems. And so just within that, we want to be really cognizant of who those schools are serving and understand the context in which they're operating. And so part of our work to date with just diving deep into understanding the context of Surrey, both as a city, as a district, in British Columbia, how it operates, and just making sure that we're fully aware and immersed into the language, the priorities, the challenges, the assets of Surrey as we prepare to go into schools, I think is really important to our study team, so that when we do go in and speak with leaders, speak with teachers, speak with school communities, we understand as much as we can their experience, and we come in as listeners and as learners with them without making assumptions about their work. So that's where
Thank you.
Go next.
Thank you. And Tony, as a closing comment, and you might want to add anything else that you feel would help us to bring to a close the public program segment of our convening. But what's come through is a reflection of where else we've been putting our energy. There's been a working group on social and emotional learning that is going to be very much a feature of our dialogue over the next couple of days, Jordan, and that's been absolutely a centre piece of the Surrey BC response. And you raised it before. Do not underestimate the social and emotional needs of all parts of the learning population. Yeah. But Tony, my question I think that's come through the chat is, how are we really able to play in heightened sense of understanding of how central social and emotional learning is? After all, I was going to say to learning. It is learning.
Yeah.
Social and emotional and cognitive, right? That equals learning. Why has it taken us this time to somehow bring into sharper relief the importance of the social and emotional when you can't learn unless you actually understand that that's what it's about?
I mean, there's a long answer, but I'll try to cut to the chase. I think one of the things we're realizing in education is that a person who knows a lot is not necessarily a well-educated person. But what you're ultimately wanting is people who have a certain, we get back to mindset. So we also, have been talking about the notion of dispositions. You want people who, when we think about we want young people to develop into the kind of people who have sort of reflexive habits of mind that how they apprehend things, how they sort of construct reality, and how they then act upon it is based on kind of their full capacity to engage with that, both intellectually and one aspect of social emotional learning, for example, the ability to sort of put yourself in the position of somebody else and see from their eyes, to understand, to be empathetic, to understand, that their experience is different than yours, but you need to bear that in mind to really understand what's going on. And to that certain extent, you also need to understand yourself in a deep way, to be able to be in a position to understand others. So what we're really realizing is that, what's going to enable young people to really thrive, particularly within a global environment, is this ability to sort of put these both cognitive and social emotional aspects together in an ultimate sort of disposition to how you engage with others and how you actually solve problems, so that it's a fuller approach to these kinds of things. And I'll speak a little bit more about I think on Wednesday, about kind of what does deeper learning mean. It is these things in combination. But if I can just want to add one quick thing as well. I do think that Susan she should practice disagreeing with me, because it's usually the better approach. But in this instance, we don't actually disagree, because I was raising the question as to whether or not we're going to go back or go forward. And actually my own reading of it is that there's every likelihood that there will be very significant efforts to try to go back. And I asked the question, why? And I think it has to do with this basic notion that most people in our country, certainly, because of the way we've been socialized, are disposed to think that the outcomes that we have in education, where there is a stratification of success, is right, that it actually reflects something about human capacities, and that our schools are sort of very intentionally structured so that those kinds of outcomes replicate themselves over and over and over again. And people feel, because frankly, it feeds right into the notion of white supremacy and the privilege and dominance of one group over another, which has also become sort of a sense that this is just the natural way things are. There's going to be a really strong push to replicate that system of hierarchy through education. And so it isn't until I think we can somehow break the cycle of reflexive understanding of like what is really right and what is really wrong, and what does equality really mean, and how do we actually need to use that as the first question we ask about things and change the way in which we think about things, that we're ever going to get away from that basic mindset, which is to say, well, we can always work towards improvement for minority kids, but are we really talking about improvement towards actual equality? Is that what we actually are shooting for? And until we get there, I think we're always going to be sort of approximations to the truth of what we're really trying to get to. So that's a bit of a diatribe, but
no, that's a brilliant moment, I think, in order to capture the spirit of this conversation. I want to thank all who've joined it, and that's a couple of hundred colleagues out there who have joined us for this opening public program part of our 2021 GCEN convening. The Centre for Global Education, along with Surrey Schools in British Columbia, through the work of GCEN, have convened us at a moment where I think, Susan, I'm going to use the language that you used before, namely, certainly this will be a moment of serious challenge, but I hear more voices of hope. It goes to Payeon's point about, I think, mind shift, that we have experienced something here across our geographies, and we are not going to allow our learning systems to return to ways of teaching and learning that did not meet the needs of all young people, particularly in terms of the challenge of the future needs of young people. I think that's the moment in which we can collectively say we are determined to redesign our systems in the way that you have talked about. And that actually is a message of hope for all of us. I want to thank those people who have joined us, those people who have contributed to comments and questions, but particularly if I could just acknowledge Susan and Payeon, thank you very much for bringing your respective international perspectives to bear. I do want to thank Christina. It's a great study, and we're looking forward to the next stage of that. But in particular, can I thank, in a sense, our co-hosts, Jordan and Tony, because this has been a great opening. And as Tony said before, it wouldn't have been possible without Heather Singmaster. So exactly. Thanks to all of those people. And can I remind members of GCEN that we will convene after a short 5-minute break, just so that we can prepare ourselves for the coming days. But to all who've joined us on this public event, thank you very much indeed. We look forward to continuing the dialogue.